Hello and welcome to the People Grow Places podcast, where we explore the virtuous circle of people, growth and place. Brought to you by Grow Places and hosted by our founder, Tom Larson.
Welcome back to the People Grow Places podcast. Today we have Professor Sadie Morgan, who amongst other things is the founder of the Quality of Life Foundation. It's going to be an amazing conversation, so let's take it away. So Sadie, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Well, thanks for the invite.
That's all right. How are you doing?
I'm really good, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
And nothing better than a Monday afternoon
To do a podcast on, exactly.
To do a podcast.
And it's good that we colour coordinated as well today with the blue on the orange background.
Yeah.
Which is great. Which is great.
Dreamy.
Yeah, awesome. So I was wondering, mainly we talk about the Quality of Life Foundation today and your work there, but before we jump into that, I'm sure many of the listeners know you already, but why don't you tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about your background and sort of why you do what you do?
Sure. Well, I started dRMM, Dry Commercial Morgan, when I was 23, I think 24, just left university and set it up with Alex Stryker, Philip Marsh. We're now, there's about 50 of us. We have 3 new amazing directors, Edith, Jonas and Saskia, and we have an office now in Berlin. So we have always, I suppose, wanted to create architecture that is, socially driven and that is sustainable in the kind of wider sense of the term, and that is collaborative and has real social impact. And I feel like that's something that I'm pretty proud to say that I think has been a sort of driving force of what we've done, for the past nearly 30 years. I'm not going to say that because it gives away my age. And all the things that I do, I obviously I'm very involved in the practice, but I do lots of other things. I chair the Independent Design Panel for High Speed 2. I sit on the Board of Homes England. I'm a commissioner for the National Infrastructure Commission. I chair the New London Sounding Board, and as you rightly said, 3 years ago I set up the Quality of Life Foundation, really to try to encourage house builders in particular, but basically the building industry, to think about what it is about our built environment that improves people's quality of life. And by kind of highlighting what it is, what are those things that improve, that we can do to improve people's quality of life through the work that we do. We are able to sort of leverage, I suppose, the huge opportunities that we have within our industry to make people's lives better.
Yeah, because it is a huge opportunity, isn't it? You say that, and there's a massive amount of responsibility that comes with that, but the built environment, is everything we live on a daily basis, and it does have a huge and meaningful impact on our quality of life, our relationships, and everything, doesn't it? But on the other side of that, what aspects of kind of quality of life do you think the built environment maybe, doesn't impact or are kind of led more by other things?
I suppose. Well, I might turn that around actually and say that what I'm interested in is the lived experience. Okay. So I suppose one of the angles that I like to see isn't just necessarily about the physical architecture. There's a huge amount of importance that we put around, the kind of aesthetics of our architecture. And, one of the things that drove me really to start this up was, the debate that was coming back. I felt, should it be pitch roof? Should it be flat roof? Should it be modern? Should it be traditional? And I'm like, does that ultimately affect people's quality of life? And one of the lessons that I've learned from sitting on the National Infrastructure Commission is that actually you need to, before you say, it doesn't matter or it does matter, what you need to do is some rigorous research. So we managed to get some funding. So Tony Pidgley, among others, but he was the biggest supporter and sponsor, gave some money, and we were able to do a nationwide piece of research into what it was that what it was that improved your quality of life with your built environment. No big surprises: sense of control, sense of belonging, access to nature, freedom of movement, healthy home, and sense of fun and wonder. I can unpack those, but I would suggest if listeners are interested, do go on the website and have a look. It's super interesting, but there's no big surprises. It's not that difficult. So if we can make sure that we are including those things within our master plans, within our buildings, and we are, and the kind of the buildings, architects do what they do best, which is deliver and design great buildings and places, then actually collectively we should come up with a solution that is better and inclusive of all of these things that are important.
Yeah, and the idea of the built environment is kind of enabling people to achieve a better quality of life. There's other examples, aren't there, where, maybe decisions through design maybe hamper quality of life as well, and just trying to sort of provide that framework that enables that is quite important, isn't it? And what you mentioned some of your themes that substantiate the framework that you've got, the quality of life. But one area I'm particularly interested in is affordability.
Yeah.
And obviously, particularly in the UK, particularly in London at the moment, with everything that's going on, affordability is so fundamental, isn't it, to people's quality of life, being able to afford good places to live or
feeling secure,
experiences,
exactly. and being safe. All of those
that
things.
kind of Maslow sort of hierarchy thing of that. And so how do you think of affordability ties into what?
I mean, affordability is certainly something that kind of comes under sort of a sense of sense of control, sense of belonging. I think if people feel that they have control over the decisions that they make, if they feel that they're part of the process, I think that that's incredibly important. But being able to be a part of that process, i.e. it's affordable, they are included, is something that's incredibly important. We tend to kind of affordability, security, safety, all of those things are part of the are kind of part of the of the kind of aspects of the quality of life framework. But as I said before, it's kind of part and parcel of a kind of much wider kind of group of things that need to be in place. But affordability, yes, we all have to. We have to be able to afford to live where we are, not just not just buying a house, but actually then living in the house. And that ties into kind of environment, making sure that we have sustainable homes that don't cost the earth in every single aspect, that we can afford to heat, and so forth. And if we're renting, to feel like we're not going to get thrown out the next day, or, that we have some kind of sense of security. It is that vulnerability, actually, that really is stressful and makes people incredibly anxious. So it is fundamentally important, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a big element of kind of trust building, isn't there, through the process that you talk about there. When people, maybe are feeling vulnerable, there's a lack of trust maybe between local communities and developers, and trying to build that trust and through some of these frameworks is really, really important, isn't it? Because one thing I've always sort of grappled with a little bit working in design in the built environment is that often, we, through the vision, through the aspiration of the project and the place, actually that can be quite a disruptive, act of developing.
Yeah.
Because maybe you're displacing communities, or maybe just through the powers of kind of market economics, you build something new and it's worth more, and that creates an affordability issue. So, trying to sort of understand that and work within that framework where it's maybe more of a kind of a growth model as opposed to a revolutionary model of what you want places to be is quite important, isn't it? Particularly, I would have thought, when you're working with some of these house builders on really large place strategies.
Yes, and it's also about understanding the nuances and making sure that you are asking those questions. So one of the projects the charity's doing is to, I think we're doing the biggest investigation into consultation nationwide, because there is no benchmark, there's no kind of standardization around what good looks like when it comes to consultation. So we've been working with Reading University, Cardiff, Ulster, and Edinburgh to try to, through a series of digital platforms and face-to-face, to really kind of understand what it is, understand what good consultation looks like, to map out local areas in relation to people's quality of life. Where is it that what is it they like? Where, where do you feel secure? Where do you have a sense of belonging within your neighbourhood? Why is that? Trying to really kind of unpick the messiness, if you like, of people's kind of intuitiveness, their actual, the lived experience. And that's something that's incredibly difficult to do. And now, we're learning, we're overlaying that, we're mapping, we're then overlaying it with socioeconomic data, so that over time you can actually, understand if you are improving, people's quality of life through a kind of value base that isn't just too transactional, like how many, how have you improved the air quality, or, how many people have you given a job to, or all of which is really important, but it doesn't actually kind of necessarily give you that, I don't know, that granularity that is so important.
Yeah. No, I agree. And as you say, it comes back, whatever metrics and other things we've got which allow us to measure, which, as you say, are useful, it does come back to actually kind of communicating with people and that very kind of human interactions and taking the time in the process to do that. And so are you doing that?
Also going back over time.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay.
But one of the other things that is incredibly important is to go back and ask the questions. Don't just thanks very much. We're finished, we're off. But go back 5-10 years after the event, we do a lot of post-occupancy evaluations. We're asking communities what works, what doesn't work, and then saying to developers, you need to take that on board and then replay that, learn lessons, make sure that you're continually improving what you do on the basis of what people tell you, because it's an iterative process. So, the best developers have always been the kind of long-term, those who are in it for the long term. We talk about stewardship a lot now. We talk about being in it for the long term. But that's true. And because everybody, if you have a stake in a process and a continual sense of improvement, then you'll make sure that it happens.
Yeah. No, I agree. And to be honest, that Grow Places, that's exactly our whole kind of ethos behind the brand, is the idea about growth being this more regenerative, more human, more natural process. And I've kind of made a bit of a stance of challenging the notion of kind of place making and it being more about this kind of, as you say, this kind of evolutionary, this growth approach, which sees places on a continuum, both backwards into history, but also forwards into the future. And you as a project team are kind of just a moment in time in that place's evolution. And so, as you say, that iterative process moving forward, but it's also, as you say, it's when you're coming in before maybe you've picked your pen up, or at least, alongside picking your pen up. It's about sort of talking to people, isn't it, and kind of understanding some of the nuances around that place and the people who occupy it.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of putting it, kind of a moment in time, because I think it's also important to remember that you are custodians of a place at that, as you say, at that moment in time. And whether you're the architect, whether you're the developer, the landscape designer, whatever it might be, that actually what you do isn't definitive. It shouldn't be the kind of end result, and you have to allow people to occupy kind of the places where you live. And sometimes that might mean putting up a net curtain, God forbid, as an architect, but actually that kind of messiness of life is really important, and the way in which people want to kind of express themselves within a space is also, I think, really important, because you are, nobody owns anything in that respect. I mean, obviously you own your own house, and but I suppose the sense of place is something that we are somewhere for a period of time, and then we move on.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really nice way of putting it, actually.
Yeah. And you'll know this reference being an architect, but the kind of the idea of that as found, isn't it? It's kind of like looking and uncovering, and this almost like slightly like archaeological way of approaching places rather than a kind of authoritarian way of doing it. And your framework is great for that. And so, if you don't mind, could you elaborate a little bit on the structure of the Quality of Life Foundation? Because you told me about this when we met a few weeks ago, and it's really, really interesting, the fact that it is a charity around a mission, but you also...
so it's a charity, and so one of the things that happens when you have crazy ideas and then try and set them up is that you realise that actually after a while you have to work out how to sustain that. And to be honest, I was like, oh my goodness, it's actually like a new startup company. And what was I thinking in terms of that's quite a big commitment. And and you can, it's exhausting to keep going out and asking people for money, and so having a charity is one thing, but actually enabling that to exist over time, you do have to go for grants, and you have to ask people to support you, and we have some great supporters, partners who do that over time. We have money from the National Lottery, we get grants from DLUC and from UK Innovation, but we compete with others for those pots of money. But in addition to that, we also have we act as kind of consultants on projects. So we have a non-for-profit business that then uses that research and works with partners on projects which they pay us for, and then the profits go back into the charity and help us to do more research and share our research, more importantly, in terms of making a kind of general uplift in what I hope is the kind of quality of the work that the built environment do. And what's exciting about doing that is that we can work with interesting developers, in particular, more progressive developers, but also others that are looking to improve and looking to partner with the foundation. It's and to help support us to gather, to make interesting projects, to improve our research, but do so through working collaboratively with them. So I think it's all in all, it's a good model. I mean, it's still incredibly hard, to keep ourselves up and running. But I think we've got a great team and some really interesting work now, and I think there's a sort of really bright future for organisations that are hoping to support, be critical friends, and to encourage others to kind of do better.
Yeah, and I must say, when you told me that, I was really interested in, as you say, that model, because I'm sure there are other examples, but I'd not heard of one which was kind of this registered charity entity, but then also consulting alongside that, and as you say, working with forward-thinking developers is great, and it's interesting, but it's actually kind of the middle, isn't it, that you kind of need to lift up. If you can raise the general standard of work and places, then that's going to impact more lives, and obviously that's a key part of what you're doing as well. And you mentioned your team there, and I'm really, really interested because you've got a really multidisciplinary team, haven't you, at the Quality of Life Foundation, both of support from board members and other people. And could you elaborate a little bit on that? And I guess, given the context of what we described, which is places are complicated, people are complicated, there's lots of different perspectives, how that enriches your work?
Okay, I will, and I'll before I touch upon the quality of life, I'll just kind of probably open that up a little bit. So at dRMM we have 50 people, 21 nationalities, We have always been incredibly multicultural and diverse in every respect, and that I think has taught me something so important, which is that those different perspectives, and that always enriches the conversation without a doubt. And all of the work that I have been involved in ever since has been about trying to encourage a different perspective. That might be because very rarely do you have a creative architect designer on panels such as National Infrastructure Commission, for example. And I think that having a creative person when people are making policy around the built environment, in whether it be national infrastructure, whether it be at Homes England, I think is vitally important that there are others other than the economists and the politicians and the engineers. And again, that's taught me something else, which is actually sometimes I think, what on earth am I doing here? And I'm here because I have a different thought process. I have a different way of approaching things. I ask different questions, and that's really super useful. And so whenever I am involved in anything, I always do my absolute best to make sure that there is a diverse group of people who are inputting. So at the foundation, whether that's researchers or, as you say, the board of directors, it's about reaching out to different communities of people and to make sure that we have as many of those voices as is possible within the team. And I passionately believe that that's something we have to help the industry do also, actually. And we know we need a more diverse built environment industry. We know all of these things, and I think we need to find ways of encouraging that to happen. And I think leading by example is one way of helping to do that.
Yeah, well, Sadie, you've led by example your whole career, so I think that's it's testament to that. And I agree fully, and I think it's so important, but it's also so enriching as well to the process if you can get these different views and perspectives on board. And if it goes closer to improving people's quality of life, then that's the aim at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's also generational. I was brought up. The kind of beginnings of all of this, I suppose, was, and I talk about this often. I was brought up in a community that my grandfather started, and so I wasn't brought up in a kind of nuclear family, if you like. I had lots of different people inputting into my upbringing, and I was able to go to, nuclear scientists who lived above me for my maths homework, the barmaid for my sex education, the kind of, sorry, that sounds as if I'm making it. I just dug myself a big hole, I feel. Let me try to pull myself back out of it. My great-grandmother, who I would come home and look after every day from school. I was 6, she was 111. And after that, my own children would then look after the elderly lady who, I brought my children up there too. The point being that actually having and being open to a community of people who are different or, from perhaps your parents is incredibly enriching and important. And the lessons that you learn and the confidence it gives you in talking to anybody and anyone about anything was, a big lesson to me.
Yeah, and that must have been an amazing upbringing to have, and obviously that's your lived experience. So it must have, for a time, just felt very natural. But as you say, some of those themes are really, really present now. And for me, I grew up in a much more traditional kind of environment than that, but me and my wife also. But we now live in a span estate from the 1960s.
Yeah,
with
my fellow director here does as well.
Yeah, with its communal living, and it's great, and you know, exactly that. It's very multi-generational. It's very multicultural. You know, there's the Diwali, the colour festival we celebrate out on the green, and the old lady who lives next door, you know, looks after our daughter from time to time, and it's just a really great community. But it's funny seeing how different people react in those environments, because we have these amazing floor-to-ceiling windows, and my wife, she's constantly trying to kind of like shut the curtain, and it's just interesting to see how people react in these different environments, and just as you say, just understanding these different nuances and different perspectives, and trying to design something that's appropriate for the place and for the types of people that you're doing is really great. And so, you know, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your work. Just one final question.
Sure.
So it's a bit of a tradition I'm creating on this podcast, which is the previous guest asked a question for the next guest without knowing who they are, and then I'll ask you to ask one again for the one who's following. So I haven't actually read this one yet, but our previous guest asks, what is one question you have been asked, maybe at an interview or at a presentation, that you wish you had answered differently, other than the one about the bar that you just mentioned right now?
Do you know what? I can't think of an exact example, but I would say that I'm an oversharer.
Right.
So I often say things that I regret. Actually, that's not entirely true. It's not about regret. It's not about regretting. But one thing I think is important is I often say things and then spend weeks thinking, oh my God, why did I say that? You know, like, oh my goodness, that was so terrible. The reality being, of course, absolutely no one remembers other than yourself. And so one of my favourite questions is I'm often asked, what's my favourite project?
Right.
And I say The Office. I say, actually, dRMM is my favourite project because I'm incredibly proud of you know, what we've managed to achieve. I'm waffling now because I'm desperately trying to think about.
I don't know. I couldn't really think of anything to that either. But I guess, as you say, it's just if you're authentic to yourself in most environments, there's going to be some things that you know say. But I also, you know, part of doing this podcast, and I think also the industry and the world generally. These boundaries between kind of personal and professional, and this kind of maybe facades that you have to hold up are in a nice way starting to kind of fall away a bit, and I think that's a really good thing, isn't it? It's, you know, we're all people at the end of the day, and if you can, you know, just allow some of that to come out, then that can only be better for, you know, building relationships, building connections with colleagues or people in the industry, and also with, you know, the communities where you're operating.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? You try to find a question that really kind of helps open up a kind of part of somebody that you wouldn't necessarily ask for. Now I'm really struggling. What would I ask? What would I ask somebody? That's probably the meanest thing.
You don't have to. You don't have to say it on the podcast now. You can write down your.
Oh my God, that's excellent.
Yeah.
Good,
Sorry, no.
Good.
That would be very mean to say. You have to write it now. But
okay. I thought you were.
We'll do it. We'll do it
that.
afterwards, and you've got a bit of time to think about it.
Phew.
And you can decide how mean you want to be, or how nice.
No, I mean it is a good question, and I think that I often say things. You know, you in the spur of the moment, you say something, and then you think, God, I could have answered that so much better. But I think, frankly, I do that the whole time. So picking one is not going to be very helpful.
That's good. I find it, I must admit now, since doing this podcast, because there's certain topics I have with certain guests who I feel more comfortable on. So I feel I can kind of engage. But then there are other topics, like when I'm speaking, you know, about something around homelessness or some of these other topics where I have a great deal of interest and empathy for, but I don't really have a lot of expertise in. Yeah, I do find myself kind of umming and ahhing quite a lot on the podcast, as I'm sure people who listen will attest, but it's all part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And opening yourselves up to this thing is really good.
Yeah,
So
I agree. Yeah.
So Sadie, all right, well, thank you very much for your time today.
Great pleasure.
Really appreciate it. And it's always good to come over here. Such a colourful office and such a colourful body of work. So thank you for that, Sadie.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the People Grow Places podcast. For more information, visit growplaces.com and follow us at We Grow Places across all social channels.